The church is bad because it's weird or it's different. They have a temple that's built in New Zealand, and they tell the story of somewhat of the building of the neighborhood that's around this temple, and that many members wanted to live in the neighborhood close to the temple. I think that's a common thing, not only in our church, but actually throughout history, throughout all religions. I got curious about it. Like, do people in other faiths currently today, do they want to live near whatever the center of their religious worship is? And it's true. If you look at American Hindus, they love to live near their temples. I have a link in the footnotes, and you can go see the statistics on that. It is not unusual for members of a faith to want to live near a place that is important to their faith. They couch this neighborhood around the temple in terms of it being very cult-like, that it's an enclave, that it's secretive, instead of these being houses that are available to buy on the public housing market like anybody else would, and anyone can move in there. I live in Utah. We live in a fantastic neighborhood that I love. On my street, probably half of the houses, probably more than half of the houses, are members of the church. Our ward is about a block away, and a lot of us just walk to church, right? I think it's great. There are plenty of people who live on my street who are not members of the church. Still great neighbors, great friends. They have not been barred from our secret enclave. They're perfectly welcome there. I imagine that it's the same thing in New Zealand and the neighborhood around their temple. People, non-members, are not barred from buying those houses. In the United States, that would certainly be illegal, to discriminate based on religion for who could buy a house. We don't do that. So here we are in section 3. We're still talking through the long list of gripes that these podcasters have about the church. They've billed this show as, we're going to talk about how Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints handles sexual abuse. But so far, we're more than an hour and a half into their not even 6 hour, it's 4 hours and like 50-ish minutes. We're an hour and a half into almost 5 hours, and we haven't really talked about anything that has to do with childhood sexual abuse yet. We've talked about things that they don't like about the church. And there are a few more, and I want to cover them for you because the cumulative effect of all of these, one after another, can be something that feels convincing to people. It feels like so many bad things, unless you can stop, be like, wait a minute, what are they actually saying? And is it actually true? Not only true about what they're saying the church is, but true in the broader sense of, would the rest of the world agree with this as a true way to look at this issue? So I have a few more for you. They say the church is bad because it uses its money for a mission that the podcasters do not agree with and do not understand. So basically, you all have a lot of money and you're using it in ways we don't like. So we go back to the issue of temples. And one of the quotes, this is early on in episode 1, actually. They say, Mormons have this huge focus on constructing these extravagant and expensive temples all over the world. They think that our church is bad because we have buildings that they think are too expensive. Now, if you want to have a conversation about how much does it cost to build a temple, I suppose that's a fair conversation to have. But if that is your only criticism of a temple, and it isn't weighed out against what is actually happening inside of a temple, it doesn't seem like they know or even really totally have an idea of what ordinances are about for us. So we kind of give them a pass and like, you don't even know what happens in temples. But the meaning that temples bring to the lives of Latter-day Saints, the meaning that they bring to our dead loved ones, is significant to our faith. So to boil it down to say, you built a building that costs too much, it doesn't make sense. We built a building that's appropriate for the seriousness of the work that we're doing, and we take it very seriously. And yes, there are members of the church all over the world, so we're building temples all over the world, and that does cost money. The point they want to make is because it costs money, what they deem as too much money, therefore the whole idea is invalid. So that's their next reason why church is bad. We spend our money on things that they don't like. Next one, the church is bad because it teaches that listening to scripture and the Holy Ghost are just silly, essentially. They give this story of a woman. I referred to her earlier. She had prayed for some guidance about if she should accept a marriage proposal. She receives some spiritual guidance that it would be okay for her to do this, and she does this. She makes her own decision to do this, and she later regrets the marriage. Her quote, this is episode 2, around minute 20. She says, "Even if you were getting the jitters about rushing into marriage, many Mormons believe that the Holy Ghost would guide them. I heard several stories where divine inspiration was central to a courtship." And she gives an example of like how this had happened to her friend. There is nothing unusual when compared to churches around the world that we expect our faith in God, our belief in scriptures, our listening to the Spirit to guide us. That's what it is to be involved in a faith. And they find this completely ridiculous. They think we're naive and very, very gullible. They tell the story of another woman who feels incredibly, incredibly tricked. She was taught that if she would participate in giving tithes and offerings, that the Lord would provide for her. And many of us have been taught that. That is a true thing. So they interview this woman, and she really, really believed that this was true until things happen and she leaves the church and she found out, her quote, "But funny, once we stopped paying tithing, we had enough money on our own. Essentially, we didn't need God to bless us anymore." Totally her prerogative. That's her right. She gets to do with her life what she wants. But the point that they're trying to make here is how silly, how foolish these church members are. They're being swindled out of their money, and they don't understand that giving money to the church, they would have more money. God would take care of them better if they would stop giving money. The contempt for not just members of our church, but members of any church is really kind of outrageous to me. It's so incredibly condescending, just looking down on faithful expressions of everyday life, right? If your faith matters, it has to matter in your pocketbook too. And the fact that we live out our faith, not just with words, but all the way down to how we spend our money, that's silly. And you would have more than enough money on your own if you didn't do that. They call it a scam. The idea here is very, very clear. They think that we are very foolish. Pay attention to this, because when we do start talking about how they're framing issues of sexual abuse, that's the point of view that they're coming into this with. Members of the church are foolish and gullible and naive and don't understand how the world works. And that becomes important later. We're almost done with the list of why they think the church is bad. Another one of their reasons is the church is bad because it's weird or it's different. They have a temple that's built in New Zealand, and they tell the story of somewhat of the building of the neighborhood that's around this temple, and that many members wanted to live in the neighborhood close to the temple. I think that's a common thing, not only in our church, but actually throughout history, throughout all religions. I got curious about it. Like, do people in other faiths currently today, do they want to live near whatever the center of their religious worship is? And it's true. If you look at American Hindus, they love to live near their temples. I have a link in the footnotes, and you can go see the statistics on that. It is not unusual for members of a faith to want to live near a place that is important to their faith. They couch this neighborhood around the temple in terms of it being very cult-like, that it's an enclave, that it's secretive, instead of these being houses that are available to buy on the public housing market like anybody else would, and anyone can move in there. I live in Utah. We live in a fantastic neighborhood that I love. On my street, probably half of the houses, probably more than half of the houses, are members of the church. Our ward is about a block away, and a lot of us just walk to church, right? I think it's great. There are plenty of people who live on my street who are not members of the church. Still great neighbors, great friends. They have not been barred from our secret enclave. They're perfectly welcome there. I imagine that it's the same thing in New Zealand and the neighborhood around their temple. People, non-members, are not barred from buying those houses. In the United States, that would certainly be illegal, to discriminate based on religion for who could buy a house. We don't do that. The neighborhood in New Zealand around the temple, it's called Temple View. And they talk about how it's still really this kind of distinctive place, although maybe not quite as much. There used to be a church-sponsored school there, I guess, and the school shut down somewhere around 2010. So not as many families are drawn to that exact neighborhood. But they describe this neighborhood as if it's sort of crazy religious town, as if it's Stepford Wives, as if it's everyone in complete lockstep, no differentiation whatsoever between anyone. It's not individual families. It's just a whole bunch of sort of church clones is how they describe it. They also go on to describe it as just really weird, worthy of making fun of. They do admit that not everyone who lives there is a member of the church, but that many people are, and they sort of make fun of, like, the streets are clean and nice, and somehow that's a bad thing. These are the nicest people you'll ever meet, and that's what makes them so weird. They call it this religious enclave, and quote, even though there's this really tight community, Mormons haven't completely separated themselves from mainstream New Zealand. So they want it both ways. They want to say they're this secretive enclave that nobody else is allowed in. Oh, but also they're also part of the New Zealand community. In fact, this podcast goes on to name a number of prominent New Zealanders who are members of the church, who have professions in acting or have gone to the Olympics or who have done something else that has given them public notoriety, as if, according to this podcast, they were completely normal, meaning members of the church are not normal. Quote, this is actually in episode 1, around minute 20. Outsiders might find some of their rules and rituals a bit unusual, worthy of a bit of teasing, like in the TV show South Park. But there's another thing. Why do they have to be so freaking nice all the time? It just isn't normal. And they laugh and laugh and laugh. And I get it. Sure, it's funny. We're nice people. And because it's coming in the context of just thing after thing after thing after thing after thing about what they think is wrong with our church and why it's bad, this doesn't read as like fun poking. It reads as like mean teasing. I'm not even sure why they put that in there, to be honest. It's just mean. The next reason why they say the church is bad, I promise we're almost done, is it's bad because they don't like our strategy to accomplish our mission. So not only do they not like the mission of the church, but they think it's bad. We have bad strategies to get to it. And here's their example. One of the podcast speakers, he finds out that missionaries go to the Missionary Training Center to learn how to teach the gospel, and that throughout the last many decades, there have been different ways that they've been taught, different techniques, and he makes fun of this. He says something like, I'm a journalist. I sure wish I could learn the techniques to get people to listen to what I wanted to say or to get them to tell me something, but I don't want to go around manipulating people, as if teaching 18 and 19-year-olds how to share the gospel means we're teaching them how to manipulate people. Let me back up. They find out that back in the day, missionaries would memorize a script. I don't think missionaries have done that for quite some time, but missionaries would memorize the discussions and memorize a script. And the podcast hosts find this completely ridiculous. They say, I thought, what in the world was in those scripts? And those tools and techniques, it's so odd that they're getting success. Scripts, tools, techniques. The journalist says, I'm intrigued. What does it take to save a soul? As a journalist, I've introduced myself to a fair number of strangers, and sometimes they're a bit hesitant to talk to me. I need to win them around. But convincing someone to join your church, to experience a spiritual conversion, to have a religious experience, that's a whole other ballgame. As if he's saying, like, yeah, I try to coerce people into talking to me as a journalist, but these kids, they're trying to coerce people into joining their church, and therefore they are bad. And the proof of that is that missionaries used to memorize the lessons. It doesn't really make sense. They say the church generally, and missionaries specifically, ask people to kind of like tune in and check with themselves about how the gospel is making them feel. That we put some amount of emphasis on feelings. And they claim this is 100% manipulation. They interview a former missionary who says, oh yes, I would teach people to be sensitive to these feelings, to pay attention. Are you feeling in your heart that what we are teaching you is true? He says we would pause and wait. And when they would say, yes, I'm having good feelings in my heart, we would tell them, God sees you and God is speaking to you. We are messengers from God and we have a message for you. And the folks here find that incredibly, incredibly intrusive, that asking the person to listen to their feelings is somehow manipulative. I don't have any statistics on this, but I'm quite certain that more than one missionary has asked someone, what are you feeling in your heart as we're teaching you these things? And the person has said, I don't feel anything, or I don't feel like this is right at all. If it was such a great manipulation technique, that wouldn't happen. Plus, asking people to check in with themselves and see how they're feeling as something, it actually is a great way. We use this in therapy all the time, asking people to stop, wait a minute, listen to yourself. How are you actually feeling? It's a great way to get people kind of back centered. What's important to you right now. They talk again in this section about the link between becoming a missionary, going home, going to school and getting married, and then lifelong membership in the church, that is also manipulation, and that people don't catch it because they themselves were missionaries out manipulating other people. Those are the major gripes that they have about our church. It's not even all of them, but those are the major ones. All of those you have probably heard before. I hope that the comments that I gave you at least give you a little bit of like, wait a minute, that's a weird thing to say. Why are they saying this? Why are they piling so many on top? In our next segment 4, you're going to start to see why they have been doing that. So we'll move on to that.